All right, let's jump right in. We're going to talk about the day money, as we know it, just completely changed. It was a single decision that, believe it or not, affects pretty much everything, from the price of your coffee to the entire balance of global power.
I mean, you can't miss it, right? The headlines are everywhere about de-dollarization. You've got groups like BRICS actively looking for other ways to do business. And it feels like the big question on everyone's mind is the dollar's time at the top finally coming to an end? It's a huge, really complex question.
But here's the thing. To really get what's going on today, we have to rewind the clock. The key to this whole modern puzzle is a single, pivotal decision that was made way back in 1971. So let's get into it.
Okay, so picture the world in 1944. After two absolutely devastating world wars, the global economy was, it was a mess. The world's leaders got together and knew they had to create some new rules for money, something stable that everyone could anchor to. And they came up with a seriously ambitious plan.
And what they came up with was the Bretton Woods system. Now, this was basically a gold standard, but with a really clever twist. It put the US dollar right at the center of the financial universe. Here's exactly how it worked.
So think of it like a pyramid, right? A really simple but super powerful hierarchy. At the very bottom, the foundation, you had gold. That was the ultimate measure of value. Then the US dollar was the only currency that was directly tied to that gold. And then every other major currency, they were all pegged to the dollar. And that move, right there, made the dollar the undisputed king.
And look, this wasn't some abstract theory. This was a rock-solid, concrete promise. The United States guaranteed that any country's central bank could show up and trade 35 US dollars for 1 ounce of gold. That promise was the bedrock for the entire world's confidence.
Okay, but here's where the story gets really interesting. This system, which seemed so stable on the surface, actually had a time bomb built right into its foundations. A central paradox that, eventually, was guaranteed to tear the whole thing apart.
It's a concept known as the Triffin Dilemma, named after the economist who saw this whole thing coming from a mile away. It basically points out this impossible situation you get into when your own money is also the world's money.
So here's the conflict in a nutshell. On one hand, for global trade to grow and boom, the world needed more and more US dollars floating around. That meant the US had to keep sending them out. But on the other hand, for people to trust the dollar, they had to believe that it was still backed by a limited pile of gold. You see the problem here? You literally can't have it both ways forever. So get this, the very thing that made this system so successful, pumping all those dollars out into the world to fuel growth, was also the poison pill that was guaranteed to kill it. With every new dollar printed, that promise to trade it for gold got just a little bit weaker. A crisis wasn't a question of if, it was always a question of when. And that when we were talking about, well, it started to become now in the late 1960s. The pressure just kept building, you could see the cracks forming, and the world was hurtling towards the exact moment that golden window was about to slam shut. And things started to unravel, and they unraveled fast. By the early 60s, we hit the tipping point. There were officially more dollars held overseas than the US had in gold to back them up. Then came the massive spending for the Vietnam War, which just flooded the world with even more dollars. So naturally, other countries started to get a little twitchy. They began trading in their dollars for actual gold, and US gold reserves started to plummet. By 1971, the whole system was on life support. And then, on a Sunday night, August 15, 1971, the hammer dropped. In a televised address that became known as the Nixon Shock, that rock-solid promise, gone. Just like that. The link was cut. The Bretton Woods era was over.
Okay, so logically you'd think, that's it, the dollar's toast, right? Without that golden anchor, what's to stop it from collapsing? But what happened next was a truly brilliant, and some would say controversial, geopolitical move that completely reinvented the dollar's power.
This was the million-dollar or maybe trillion-dollar question for American policymakers. They had to find a new reason for the entire world to need US dollars. And the answer they came up with wasn't shiny and gold. It was black, and it came out of the ground.
Enter the Petrodollar System. It was this game-changing deal struck with Saudi Arabia, the heavyweight of OPEC, and it boiled down to 3 key things. 1, Saudi Arabia would only sell its oil in US dollars. 2, they take all those massive profits and invest them back into US government debt. And 3, in exchange for all that, the US would provide them with military protection.
And boom, just like that, oil became the new gold. If you were a country and you wanted to buy oil to, run your economy, you had to get your hands on US dollars first, period. This was a masterstroke that created a massive built-in demand for the dollar that had absolutely nothing to do with gold.
So, let's bring this all back to today. Why does this history lesson matter? Well, that decision in 1971 didn't just save the dollar. It basically ushered in a whole new era of money, the era of fiat currency, which has had some profound consequences that we are all dealing with right now.
And this switch created some massive trade-offs. We basically swapped a system based on a physical thing, gold, for one based purely on trust in a government. We traded the rigid discipline of gold for flexibility. The upside? Well, governments can now react to crises more easily. The downside? A constant threat of inflation and almost zero limits on how much debt a government could take on.
And you want to see a direct result of that flexibility? Just look at this. Without that hard limit of gold in the vault, government debt became the easy button for financing spending. And as you can see, U.S. national debt as a chunk of the economy has just gone into the stratosphere since 1971.
And here's another consequence that hits a little closer to home: the value of your money. A flexible system allows for a constant expansion of the money supply, which is the recipe for inflation. The result? Since the Fed was created, your dollar has lost a mind-boggling 96% of its purchasing power. Ouch. And all of this brings us right back to where we started. The very consequences of the system created in 1971, the insane debt, the ability to weaponize the dollar with sanctions, those are the exact reasons it's being challenged today. It's these exact issues that are pushing countries like the BRICS nations to say, hey, maybe it's time to find a better way.
So, we've come full circle. The fiat system, born on that day in 1971, is now facing its own crisis of confidence. And the real question for you, for all of us, is, after the age of gold and after the age of the petrodollar, what comes next? What does the future of money even look like?